The stars had always called to humanity, and by the year 3147, humans had finally answered that call in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. Massive ships crossed the darkness between solar systems, carrying millions of people to new worlds where they built cities and raised families under alien suns. The journey from Earth had taken centuries, but humanity had proven itself patient when it needed to be, and determined when patience was not enough. They had discovered that the galaxy was not empty at all, but filled with life beyond counting. 3,000 different species had already formed a great alliance called the Concord of Ascended Peoples. And these ancient civilizations watched with curiosity as the young species from the small blue planet took its first steps among the stars. The Concord had existed for over 12,000 years, built on a simple idea that all intelligent beings could share the galaxy without fighting over wars were forbidden under their laws, and disputes between species were settled through talking and compromise rather than weapons and blood. The elder races had seen too much destruction in the early ages of the galaxy, and they had sworn never to let such horror happen again. When human ambassadors first arrived at the great council stations of the Concord, the ancient beings studied them with a mixture of wonder and amusement. These creatures were so young, barely a few thousand years removed from living in caves and hunting with stone tools. Their lives were impossibly short by galactic standards, with most humans living less than 200 years even with their best medical technology. The Valkyrie, a species of telepathic beings who lived for 10,000 years, found it hard to understand how any creature could accomplish anything meaningful in such a brief time. The crystalline Sonathi, who measured their own existence in geological ages, wondered how humans could think clearly when death was always so close behind them. Yet, despite their youth and their short lives, humans had something that made the elder races pay attention. They adapted faster than any species the Concord had ever seen, learning new technologies in decades that had taken other civilizations centuries to master. They negotiated trade deals that somehow left both parties satisfied, and they built colonies on worlds that other species had dismissed as too harsh or too dangerous. Human scientists asked questions that no one had thought to ask before, and human engineers built machines that worked in ways that should have been impossible according to established physics. The Doest Bind and Fambers built machines that worked in ways that should have been impossible according to established physics. The Mayenge Concord welcomed humanity into their alliance, granting them voting rights and trade access like any other member species. Human merchants spread across the trade lanes, their ships carrying goods and ideas between distant star systems. Human diplomats learned the languages and customs of dozens of species, becoming valuable mediators in disputes that had lasted for centuries. Human artists created works that moved audiences across the galaxy to emotions they had never felt before. For 300 years, humanity grew and prospered as part of the galactic community. They built great stations in orbit around gas giants, established mining operations in asteroid belts, and terraformed barren rocks into garden worlds where children played under engineered skies. The elder races began to see humans not as amusing newcomers, but as valuable partners in the great work of civilization. Some even suggested that humanity might one day join the inner council of the Concord, taking their place among the founders and shapers of galactic law. But the galaxy was larger than even the Concord knew, and not every powerful civilization had chosen to join the alliance in the outer darkness of the galactic halo. Far from the busy trade routes and populated systems, something ancient and terrible had been watching. The dominion of Carveth had existed longer than the Concord itself, ruling their fortress worlds in complete isolation from the rest of galactic civilization. They had been conquerors once, spreading across hundreds of star systems and subjugating every species they encountered. Their Obsidian warships had darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds, and their armies had marched through the ruins of civilizations that had thought themselves invincible, but that had been long ago. In an age before the Concord was formed, when the galaxy was a wilder and more dangerous place, the Carveth had grown quiet over the millennia. Retreating to their home systems and ceasing their wars of expansion, the elder races of the Concord believed they had simply exhausted themselves. Burning out their aggression like a fire running out of fuel, some thought the Carveth had achieved some kind of enlightenment. Realizing that conquest brought no lasting satisfaction, others believed they were simply waiting for something. Though no one could guess what that might be, truth was far simpler and far more terrible. The Carveth had not stopped because they were tired or enlightened. They had stopped because they had run out of interesting prey. Every species they had conquered had broken the same way, following the same predictable pattern of resistance and collapse. The hunt had lost its thrill, and the Dominion had retreated into boredom, their warrior culture slowly rotting from within as generations passed without purpose. Then their long-range sensors detected something new in the Veil Nebula, a region of space they had long ignored as empty and worthless human colony ships were settling worlds there, building outposts and stations with the cheerful efficiency that characterized everything humans did. The Carveth observed these newcomers for several years, studying their technology and their behavior with growing interest. What they saw excited them in ways they had not felt for thousands of years. Here was a species that had never known true war, that had never faced an enemy who wanted not just victory, but complete domination. Here was prey that might actually be worth hunting. The High Dominarch of the Carveth, a being so old that it had forgotten its own birth name, made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. It was time for the Dominion to remind the universe why the elder races had once feared the darkness between the stars. It was time to hunt again, and these strange, short-lived creatures from the planet called Earth would learn what every other species had learned before them. They would learn to kneel, or they would learn to die. The Carveth began preparing their fleets for the first time in millennia, and the darkness of the galactic halo stirred with terrible purpose. Humanity had no idea what was coming for them. They would find out soon enough. The first Carveth ship appeared in the Veil Nebula without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the human colony world of New Helsinki. It was massive beyond anything humans had ever built. A mountain of black metal shaped like a blade aimed at the heart of the planet below. The Bastille colonists stared up at the sky in confusion and fear as the alien vessel blocked out their sun, casting a shadow that stretched across entire continents. Governor Amara Okonkwo sent urgent messages to Earth and to the nearest Concord outpost, requesting information about this unknown visitor. The response from the Concord came quickly, and it was filled with a kind of controlled panic that Okonkwo had never heard from the usually calm elder races. The ship belonged to the Carveth Dominion, they said, and humanity should do whatever the visitors demanded without question or hesitation. When Okonkwo asked why, the Concord representative simply said that the Carveth were not a species that accepted refusal. Ambassador Yelena Korolyova arrived on New Helsinki 3 days later, having traveled at maximum speed from her posting on the Concord capital station. She was 67 years old, with gray hair that she kept short and practical, and eyes that had seen more diplomatic crises than most humans could imagine. The United Earth government had chosen her specifically for this first contact because she had a reputation for remaining calm under pressure and finding solutions. Where others saw only problems, she walked into the meeting chamber with her back straight and her face composed, ready to negotiate with whatever being the Carveth had sent to speak for them. The emissary was waiting for her, and Koroleova had to force herself not to step backward when she saw it. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in biomechanical armor that seemed to grow from its flesh rather than being worn over it where a face should have been. There was only a mass of writhing sensory tendrils that moved constantly, tasting the air and tracking every movement in the room. The creature radiated menace the way a fire radiates heat, and Koroleova could feel her heart beating faster despite her decades of training. "I am voice of the Dominion," the creature said, its words somehow emerging from the mass of tendrils in perfect human language. "I speak with the authority of the High Dominarch, and my words are law." Koroleova inclined her head politely, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "I am Ambassador Yelena Koroleova, representing the United Earth government and all human colonies," she replied. "I welcome you to our space and hope we can establish a productive relationship between our peoples." The emissary made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been contempt. "There will be no relationship," it said. "There will be submission, as there has always been submission when lesser species encounter the Dominion." It proceeded to outline its demands in a tone that made clear these were not requests but commands. Humanity would immediately surrender 37 colony worlds in the Veil Nebula and surrounding regions, evacuating all civilians within 1 standard month. Humanity would provide 1/5 of its total population as labor stock for the Dominion, to be collected in batches over the next decade and transported to Karveth work camps. Humanity would pay tribute in resources and technology for as long as the Dominion desired, with the amount to be determined by Karveth overseers stationed on every human world, and humanity would acknowledge the Karveth as their absolute masters, incorporating worship of the High Dominarch into their cultural and religious practices. Korolev listened to each demand with the same calm expression, her mind racing behind her composed exterior. She had studied the Karveth during her journey to New Helsinki, reading every fragment of information the Concord had about this mysterious species. She knew they had conquered hundreds of civilizations in the ancient past, breaking each one with overwhelming force and absolute cruelty. She knew the elder races of the Concord lived in quiet terror of the day the Karveth might turn their attention back to the populated galaxy, and she knew that every species the Karveth had encountered before had eventually submitted to their demands, choosing slavery over extinction. The emissary finished speaking and stood waiting, clearly expecting Koroleova to begin pleading for mercy or asking what concessions might reduce the harshness of the terms. Instead, she asked a question that seemed to confuse the creature entirely. "May I know your name?" she said. "Your personal name, not your title." The tendrils on the emissary's face writhed in what might have been surprise. "Why would you need my name?" it demanded. "For the history books," Koroleova replied, her voice steady and her eyes meeting the creature's sensor tendrils without flinching, "so that future generations know who delivered the message that started the war." The chamber fell silent as the emissary processed her words. Had delivered ultimatums to hundreds of species over its long life, and not one of them had ever responded like this. They begged. They wept. They offered desperate counter-proposals. They asked for time to consider. They pleaded for their children and their worlds. They did not speak of future generations and history books as if they expected to have either. "You do not understand," the emissary said finally. "The Karveth do not lose wars. We have never lost a war. Every species that has stood against us has been broken and subjugated. There is a first time for everything." Koroleova said simply. She stood from her chair and walked toward the door, pausing before she left to look back at the towering creature. "Go back to your Dominarch and tell it that humanity declines its generous offer," she said. "Tell it that we will not surrender our worlds, our people, or our freedom. Tell it that if it wants what is ours, it will have to take it by force. And tell it that we will make that force cost more than it can possibly imagine." The emissary remained motionless for a long moment. "You are choosing extinction." It said. "No," Koroleova replied. "We are choosing to fight. Those are not the same thing. And you will learn the difference." She walked out of the chamber and began sending messages to Earth, to the colonial defense forces, to every human settlement in the galaxy. The messages all said the same thing: prepare for war across the Concord. The elder races watched in horror as the news spread. The humans had defied the Karveth. They whispered to each other. The humans had chosen war over submission. Did they not understand what they had done? Did they not realize that they had just signed the death warrant for their entire species? The elder races began preparing memorial services for humanity, certain that within a year there would be nothing left of this brave, foolish species but ashes and memories. They were wrong about almost everything, but they would not understand that for quite some time. The Karveth attacked with a fury that had not been seen in the galaxy for 12,000 years. 12 Engays, a Karveth, attacked with a fury that had not been seen in the galaxy for 12,000 years. Battle fleets emerged from the darkness of the galactic halo, each one carrying enough firepower to shatter moons and crack the crusts of planets. 400,000 warships moved toward human space in formations so perfect they seemed like geometric art. Beautiful and terrible at the same time, the first human world to fall was New Helsinki, the same colony where Ambassador Koroleova had delivered her defiant response. The planetary defense grid held for 6 hours against the Karveth assault, which was 6 hours longer than anyone had expected. Then the shields failed, and the bombardment began, raining fire from orbit until the colony's domed cities were nothing but melted glass, and Ash Governor Okonkwo died at her post, still directing evacuation efforts. Even as the ceiling collapsed above her, 17 million humans perished on New Helsinki, and the Karveth recorded the victory as easily as a clerk might note a minor transaction. More worlds fell in the weeks that followed, each one defended with desperate courage, and each one ultimately overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Karveth numbers. The human fleet fought back with everything it had, but their ships were designed for exploration and commerce rather than war. They scored some victories, destroying Karveth vessels through surprise attacks and clever tactics. But for every enemy ship they killed, 10 more appeared to take its place by the end of the first month. 9 human colony worlds had been reduced to burned and broken wastelands by the end of the second month. 11 more had joined them. Elder races of the Concord watched with the sad certainty of beings who had seen this story play out many times before. This was how it always went when a species challenged the Karveth. They would say to each other, first came defiance, then came destruction. Then came surrender. Humanity would break soon enough, they predicted. And perhaps the Karveth would be merciful enough to leave some of them alive as slaves. But humanity did not break in the orbital shipyards above Earth. Something extraordinary was happening. Factories that had spent centuries building passenger liners and cargo haulers were being retooled at impossible speed. Their production lines converted to churn out warships and weapons. Human engineers worked in shifts that ran around the clock, sleeping in their workshops and eating at their stations, driven by a kind of focused fury that the elder races had never witnessed. Before, human scientists opened research files that had been sealed for generations. Theoretical weapons that the Concord had banned long ago because they were too dangerous for civilized species to possess. The humans did not care about the Concord's laws anymore, not when their children were burning on distant worlds within 3 months. The first new human warships began rolling off the production lines. They were ugly things compared to the elegant vessels that humans had built before. All hard angles and bristling weapons with no thought given to comfort or aesthetics, but they were fast and they were deadly. packed with technologies that made the Karveth commanders pause in confusion when they encountered them. Weapons that twisted space-time into knots around enemy ships, ripping them apart from the inside shields that adapted to incoming fire. Learning the frequency of enemy weapons and becoming stronger with each hit, propulsion systems that let human ships appear and disappear like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Karveth could respond. The Karveth had expected humanity to surrender or die, following the pattern of every other species they had conquered. What they had not expected was for humanity to evolve in the middle of a war, transforming from prey into predator in a matter of months at the Battle of Harrow's Gate. Admiral Yuki Tanaka led a fleet of 30 human ships against a Karveth armada of over 1,000. The battle lasted for 9 hours, and by the end of it, the human fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage. But Tanaka had one last surprise for the enemy. As the Karveth command dreadnought moved in to confirm the kill, Tanaka activated 3 antimatter cores aboard her crippled flagship and set a collision course. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. A new sun born from sacrifice and rage. The Karveth command dreadnought and 47 escort vessels were vaporized in an instant, including 3 of the Dominion's most experienced admirals. Tanaka became the first human to be remembered by the Karveth, her name spoken in their war councils as a curse and a warning at the siege of Vela Prime. 60,000 colonists who refused evacuation orders and stayed behind to operate the planetary defense grid. They held out for 19 days against continuous bombardment, dying by the hundreds each day but never abandoning their posts. Their sacrifice bought enough time for 3 million refugees to escape on evacuation ships, including 40,000 children who would grow up to fight in the wars to come. The defenders of Vela Prime became heroes, their names carved into monuments on a dozen worlds. But perhaps the most important change in the war was not any single battle or sacrifice. It was the way humanity began to fight as a species, rather than as individuals or nations. Old divisions between Earth and the colonies dissolved in the face of the common. Enemy resources flowed freely between systems, with wealthy worlds giving everything they had to support the war. Effort volunteers flooded recruitment centers faster than the military could process them. Humans of every age and background, desperate to do their part. And perhaps most surprisingly, humanity was not alone in this fight across the Concord. Individual members of other species began to break their government's strict neutrality. Volhari telepaths offered their services as battlefield coordinators, linking human commanders across vast distances. Anathi engineers shared crystalline armor technology that could withstand Karveth weapons. Dozens of other species sent volunteers, medical supplies, and technical expertise, defying the Concord's official policy of non-interference. They came because they had watched humanity stand against impossible odds and refused to break. They came because they were ashamed of their own government's cowardice, and they came because they wanted to be part of something that mattered, something that might change the galaxy forever. By the end of the war's 2nd year, the Karveth advance had stalled. By the middle of the 3rd year, it had reversed. Human fleets were pushing into Karveth territory now, and the ancient conquerors were learning what it felt like to watch their own worlds burn. They had wanted a war, and humanity had given them one. They just had not expected to lose it. The Karveth homeworld was called Dominion Prime, and no outsider had ever seen it and lived to describe what they saw. It floated in the heart of their empire like a black jewel, surrounded by rings of defense stations and orbital fortresses that had never been tested in real combat. For 12,000 years, those defenses had been unnecessary, because no species had ever been foolish or powerful enough to bring war to the Karveth homeland. Until now, human fleets had torn through the outer territories of the Dominion like fire through dry grass, liberating slave populations and destroying everything that carried the mark of Carveth Authority worlds that had served the Dominion for millennia saw their masters driven away for the first time in living memory. And the slaves rose up with a fury born from countless generations of suffering. Carveth found themselves fighting on two fronts, against the human invasion from without, and against their own former property from within. For the first time in their ancient history, the High Dominarchs began to consider the possibility of defeat it, sent an emissary to the human command ship, a different creature than the one that had delivered the original ultimatum. Bearing an offer of conditional surrender, the Carveth would return all human prisoners and all captured worlds. The emissary said the Carveth would pay reparations in resources and technology for the next 1,000 years. The Carveth would even accept monitoring stations in their territory to ensure they never threatened anyone again. In exchange, humanity would halt its advance and leave Dominion Prime intact. General Marcus Webb received the emissary in the war room of the battleship Remembrance, surrounded by holographic maps showing the disposition of human and allied forces. Across Carveth space, he was 62 years old, a soldier who had spent his entire adult life in service to humanity. And he had personally visited the ruins of 12 worlds that the Carveth had destroyed. He had walked through the ashes of New Helsinki, stood in the mass graves of Vala Prime, and listened to the testimony of slaves who described horrors that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The emissary finished presenting its offer and waited for Webb's response. No. Webb said simply. The emissary seemed confused, its sensory tendrils writhing in what might have been disbelief. You do not understand, it said. We are offering you everything you wanted. Your worlds returned, your people freed, your safety guaranteed. You are offering us conditions, Webb replied. We did not fight this war for conditions. Then what do you want? The emissary demanded. Webb stood and walked to the holographic display, zooming in on the image of Dominion Prime. We want you to understand something, he said. Something that no species has ever taught you in all your long history of conquest. We want you to understand fear. The emissary was escorted from the ship, and within an hour, every Concord channel was buzzing with desperate messages from the elder races. They urged humanity to accept the surrender, to show mercy to a defeated enemy, to remember the principles of civilization that had kept the galaxy at peace for so long. A delegation of 12 senior ambassadors from the most powerful Concord species requested an audience with General Webb, and he granted it. They spoke for hours, pleading their case with every argument they could muster. War was a disease, they said, and the cure was forgiveness. Violence only created more violence, and humanity would poison its own soul if it continued down this path. The Carveth were defeated, and that should be enough. History would record humanity's triumph without the need for further bloodshed. Webb listened patiently to everything they had to say, then asked them a question. How many species did the Carveth destroy before they grew bored with conquest? He asked. How many civilizations were erased from existence while your Concord stood by and watched? The ambassadors exchanged uncomfortable glances. That was long ago. One of them said finally, before the Concord existed, before the current order was established, and when the Carveth attacked us, Webb continued. When they announced their intention to enslave and slaughter my people, what did the Concord do? Silence. You archived our complaint, Webb said. You expressed concern. You debated intervention, and while you debated, my people died by the millions. He stood and addressed the assembly directly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made even the ancient beings lean back in their seats. You taught the galaxy that peace is preserved through forgetting, he said, that grievances are archived and violence abandoned. But you forgot something essential about my kind. We do not forget. We are the species that carved names into stone so that the dead would be remembered. We are the species that built monuments to our wars so that we would never repeat them. The Karveth asked for our submission. They received our answer, and now the galaxy will receive its lesson. Some things should not be forgotten. Some things should be erased entirely, so that no one ever attempts them again. The final campaign against Dominion Prime lasted 4 months. Human fleets surrounded the Karveth homeworld in an unbreakable siege, cutting off all supplies and communications. When the orbital defenses finally fell, the bombardment began, not to force surrender, but to ensure that nothing survived. The cities of Dominion Prime were reduced to rubble. Then the rubble was reduced to dust. Then the dust was scattered on the stellar winds. Every archive was destroyed. Every genetic repository incinerated. Every record of Karveth history and culture erased from existence. The slave populations were evacuated before the destruction, given ships and supplies and the freedom to rebuild their own civilizations. But the Karveth themselves were offered no mercy when it was over. Dominion Prime was nothing but a field of asteroids orbiting a star that had no name on any map. The 12 worlds of the Karveth core systems had been similarly unmade, transformed from centers of ancient power into empty coordinates and databases that no one would ever visit. The Karveth species, which had terrorized the galaxy since before the Concord existed, was gone. Not defeated, not subjugated, not reformed. Gone as if they had never existed at all. General Webb gave one final order before the human fleets withdrew from Karveth space. Every map, every database, every navigational computer in the human fleet would have its records of the Karveth systems deleted. The war would be removed from official history. The battles and the heroes and the dead relegated to sealed archives that would never be opened. There would be no monuments, no memorial days, no lessons taught in schools. The Karveth had wanted to erase humanity from existence. Humanity had done something worse. They had made the Karveth never exist at all. 100 years passed, and the galaxy moved on. New species discovered faster than light travel and made their first tentative contacts with the Concord. Eager to join the great family of intelligent beings, old species reached the end of their evolutionary journeys, either transcending the higher states of existence or fading quietly into extinction. Trade routes expanded. New alliances formed, and the business of civilization continued as it always had, with billions of beings going about their daily lives without ever thinking about the forces that kept them safe. Humanity had become one of the most respected species in the Concord, their representatives sitting on councils that had once dismissed them as amusing. Newcomers, human merchants, carried goods between distant stars. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers on projects that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. And human artists created works that touched the hearts of beings who had nothing in common with Earth except the capacity to feel. The war was never spoken of on Earth. Children learned history that jumped from the early days of galactic contact directly to the golden age of human expansion, with no mention of the dark years in between. Veterans who had served in the fleets received pensions and honors, but the citations on their medals were vague, and the ceremonies where they received them were private. The names of Tanaka and Webb and Koroleova faded from public memory, becoming nothing more than entries in genealogical databases. Ancestors of families who did not know why their last names sometimes made elder races look away with strange expressions. But the memory had not truly vanished. It had simply been moved, hidden in places where only those who needed to know could find it. In the great archive of the Concord, buried beneath layers of encryption that would outlast the stars themselves, a file existed with a simple label: Record of the Third Millennium Incident. The file contained everything: the names of the dead, the coordinates of destroyed worlds, the complete history of a species that no longer existed, and a war that had never officially happened. Access to the file required the highest security clearance in the Concord. And the beings who held such clearance never discussed what they read there, but they all read it, every single one of them, as part of their training for positions of leadership, and they all emerged from the reading room with the same expression on their faces, a mixture of fear and respect, and something that might have been gratitude. New diplomats from young species sometimes asked questions that made their senior colleagues uncomfortable. Why? Was there a dark region in the galactic halo where no one traveled? Why did the star maps show a cluster of systems marked as navigation hazard, no approach, despite sensors showing nothing but empty rocks and cold stars? Why did the elder races sometimes fall silent when humans entered the room, exchanging glances that seemed loaded with meaning that no one would explain? The answers they received were always the same. Some questions are better left unasked. A few curious souls ignored the warnings and tried to investigate on their own, traveling to the Forbidden region or searching through ancient databases for clues. They always came back changed, quieter somehow, and they never spoke of what they had found. One such investigator, a young scholar from a species called the Mireth, made it all the way to the edge of the Forbidden Zone before her ship's computer refused to proceed further. The navigation system simply locked her out, displaying a message she had never seen before. This region is restricted by unanimous Concord resolution. Access is denied by order of the founding species. When she returned to her homeworld and reported what had happened, her mentor took her aside and spoke words that she would never forget. There are 3,000 species in the Concord, the old scholar said. Once there were 3,001, but one of them made a mistake. What kind of mistake? The young Mireth asked. They assumed the humans would break like everyone else had broken before. They assumed that short lives meant short memories. They assumed that a species barely out of its caves could not possibly threaten beings who had conquered stars. They were wrong about everything. The old scholar leaned closer, its voice dropping to a whisper. The humans do not bluff. Young one, the humans do not forget, and if you threaten what they love, the humans do not stop, not until the threat is gone, not until it is erased so completely that even the memory of it fades. That is why the region is forbidden, not because there is danger there, but because there is nothing there, nothing at all. And that nothing is a message. A message to whom? The young Mireth asked. To everyone, her mentor replied. To every species that might someday look at humanity and see easy prey. To every conqueror who might dream of short-lived creatures from the little blue planet. The message is, do not try, because this is what happens when you do on Earth. Generations came and went without ever learning the truth about what their ancestors had. Dun children looked up at the night sky and saw wonder, not warning. They saw the lights of distant suns and imagined the alien friends they might someday meet, not realizing that some of those lights shone on empty worlds where entire civilizations had once stood. They did not know that the darkness between certain stars was not empty, but emptied. Not natural, but created. A void carved into the fabric of the galaxy by human hands. And perhaps that was for the best. The war had been necessary. The veterans would say to each other in private meetings that no one else attended. The complete erasure had been necessary. But it was not something to celebrate. It was something to be kept hidden, a dark deed done for bright reasons. A nightmare that protected the dream humanity had become the guardian of galactic peace, not through diplomacy or trade, but through a demonstration of what happened when peace failed. They had written a warning in emptiness, a message visible only to those who knew where to look. The message was silence itself, and for 100 years. And then 1,000, and then 10,000 more. The galaxy listened. No species ever challenged humanity again, not because they had forgotten what humanity could do, but because some lessons, once taught, never need to be repeated. The stars burned on through the endless night, and in the space between them, where a great empire had once ruled in cruelty and shadow, There was only quieta quiet that spoke louder than any words ever could, a quiet that said, "This is what we are capable of. This is what we will do if we must, and this is why you should never, ever make us prove it again." And somewhere in the archives of every elder race, locked behind encryption that would last until the universe grew cold and dark, a file waited, a file that began with a simple statement that every leader of every species would eventually read and remember. The humans do not bluff. The humans do not forget. And if you threaten what they love, the humans do not stop. The galaxy had learned, and the galaxy would remember.